everyone, it's Clarice and this is Clarice Reads. A few things that you may or may not know about me. 1. I'm Filipino. 2. Even though I have a booktube channel, I haven't actually been reading much lately. And 3. Because I haven't been reading much lately, but I'm still buying a few books every now and then, I have accumulated quite a few books on my to-be-read pile. So keeping all that in mind, today I will be sharing with you all the Philippine literature that's currently on my to-be-read pile. To share with you some books that you may be interested in picking up, but also to encourage or shame myself into reading these books. Because when I actually listed them down, there were way more of them than I initially thought there were. So today I'm sharing with you 10 books written by Filipinos that are currently on my TBR. So the first book I'm sharing with you is Dead Balagtas, Mga Sayaw ng Dagat at Lupa by Emiliana Campilan. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't actually know the synopsis of this. I just know that it's a graphic novel. It involves more than one story, and it involves some current issues in society, but also some Philippine history. The main reason I actually bought this was because of the art, because I don't really need a synopsis to be encouraged to read something that looks as beautiful as this does. I mean, look at this. Do you really need a synopsis to want to read this? Because I sure didn't. Another reason I was more motivated by this was because it seemed like this whole thing would probably be in Filipino rather than English. And even though I live here, I don't actually speak that much Filipino, so I think if I read more Filipino, maybe I'll get a bit better. Who knows? The second book on my list is Monstress by Leslie Tenorio, which is actually a book by, I think, a Filipino-American author, which makes sense because it's a book about Filipino-American communities both in California and in the Philippines. It's actually short story collection, so I don't really know synopsis for this either. I actually picked this up because I've heard good things about it from, I think, both Weena and Chrissy, whose channels I'll link down below. I also have just been wanting to read more short story collections because ever since I read another local book, actually, Instructions on How to Disappear by Gabriella Lee, I decided to give short story collections, which I used to not like, a second chance. And then soon after I read this, I also read some 40 Tales from the Afterlives, which I loved. So I figured I should probably try to read more short story collections in the future. The next book on my TBR is Mark 9 verse 47 by Maika Ezawa and Tapay Pascual. Being totally honest, before I turned on this camera, all I knew about this book was that it was a comic. But I decided just now to do some research, and it turns out that the verse, Mark 9 verse 47, actually goes, "And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than with two eyes to be thrown into hell." So after skimming through a couple of reviews and reading synopsis, it turns out the main character actually did gorge his eye out because it did cause him to sin. And this is some sort of supernatural story that has to do with the main character trying to close the gates of hell or something like that. Actually, the only reason I have this book is because my brother is kind of an artist, and I think it was my ninang, which in Filipino stands for godmother, who had the sign with dedications to him in it to give to him. But actually, my brother is less interested in comics and in books than I am, even though he draws. It's kind of complicated, so it ended up on my shelf. And since it seems kind of interesting anyway, might as well read it, right? The next two books on my TBR are actually from the same series. They are Tree and My Brother, My Executioner, both by Efshanil Jose, which are the second and third books in the Rosales Saga. The Rosales Saga in general follows a family generation by generation through the times of a little bit of Spanish, but mostly American colonization. Since, as in case you may not know, the Philippines was once colonized by the Spaniards and then after that colonized by the Americans. I actually have read two other books in this series. The first book, chronologically, Poon, and the fourth book, The Pretenders. Which is fine because you don't really need to read these books in chronological order because they actually weren't published in chronological order either. And I look forward to finishing this whole series eventually with these two books and then with the fifth and final book afterwards. It says here that in 1973, My Brother, My Executioner was actually banned by the martial law regime, which makes me actually want to read this more now. What number are we at? The sixth book in my TBR is Kommunity 2017 by a bunch of artists, but mainly edited by Paula Heras and Richard Mercado. This is a series of a lot of short comics. The creators include Arnold Are, who wrote The Mythology Class, which is a graphic novel that I really enjoyed when I read it. And Budget Tan, who wrote all of the Trece novels, which are kind of these supernatural crime novels set in the Philippines, which I also loved. And also includes comics by a couple of people that I know personally, not that I've talked to them anytime recently, but I do still want to support them, and I'm still pretty proud that their work is here. Next book is Strange Natives, The Forgotten Memories of a Forgetful Old Woman by Paula Heras and Jericho Marte. This is another comic that I don't really know the synopsis for because the actual synopsis is pretty vague. But as far as I can tell, it seems like the story revolves around the native land of the Philippines before the time of invaders and colonizers. And the art also seems pretty cool. It seems kind of rough and pencil-y, which I guess is just the style. But there's some panels that look pretty detailed. The name might seem familiar because Paula Heras is also one of the editors of Kommunity, the book that I just mentioned, and also wrote the first Strange Natives book, which I did read previously, which I actually didn't like. Though based on Goodreads reviews, it seems like the overwhelming opinion is that this one is much better than that other one. So I won't let my opinion of the first book taint my opinion of this book. This book was also highly recommended by Chrissy, and I trust her opinion. So I think I'm actually going to enjoy this. Again, I just need to get around to it and actually read it. Next book on my TBR is actually only here because I was supposed to have read it in high school but didn't. And that book is Dekada 70 by Luwalhati Bautista. It is a book set in the 1970s, as you could guess by the title. But the 1970s in the Philippines were also the time of martial law. It was a time when the media was being silenced and when there was a lot of death and not a lot of freedom, and basically just a very serious time in Philippine history. And as someone who wasn't living in the 1970s, I think it's kind of important for me to read books like this that explain it and give me a better perspective of what happened and just understand all the things that we fought for. So yeah, important book. Kind of scared to read this because it's all in Tagalog, but I will try. The ninth book on my Philip TBR is Ang Mundo ni Andong Agimat by Arnold Are. This is another graphic novel. I don't really know the synopsis of this either, but it's not my fault because the back just has a 2-sentence, super vague description. It's literally just saying that the world is a mystery. However, a quick Google search showed me that this is kind of like a superhero novel based on Philippine mythology, which sounds super cool, especially since, as I mentioned previously, I loved Arnold Are's other book, The Mythology Class, which is kind of a book based on Philippine mythology, which involves a lot of teenagers or young adults, whatever they are, basically saving the world. So I'm probably going to like this just because I love the Mythology Class so much. And the 10th and final book on my TBR is Ang Unang Katipunan ng Kikomachine Komix by Manix Abrera, which is a collection of the first 3 volumes of Kikomachine Comics. If you don't know what Kikomachine Comics is, in the same way that I didn't know what it was, it is actually a comic strip that used to be published in Philippine Daily Enquirer, which is a newspaper here in the Philippines. And since this used to be a newspaper comic strip, I expect these to be short and funny, but I also expect them to discuss relevant issues in society. I actually received this as a gift from my friend on my birthday, and I'm glad I did because this is one of those books that I would pass by in the bookstore all the time and think about buying all the time but never buy. So I'm really looking forward to this. I think they're currently at 5 or 6 volumes, and for a comic to reach 5 or 6 volumes, it has to be good, right? So that's all the Phillit that is currently on my TBR. And since I took the time to list these books down, revisit them, and for a lot of them, actually read the synopses for the very first time. Hopefully I'll get the motivation to actually read these books so that I can talk about more local literature on this channel, so that I can lessen the number of books on my TBR, and so that maybe I can get a little bit better at speaking Filipino. That last one's a bit of a stretch goal though, let's be honest. So anyway, please feel free to share your thoughts on these books with me, especially if you've read them and would want me to prioritize any of them specifically, or if you have any other Phillit books for me to add to my growing TBR of Phillit books. And as usual, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!